He asked me. It's raining. It's raining. We need to start gathering. We need to start gathering in the church. We need to start gathering in the church. Please start gathering into the church. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, you guys. It's my honor now to introduce our keynote speaker, Archbishop of Philadelphia, Archbishop Nelson Perez. Archbishop Perez earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from Montclair State University in 1983. He entered St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Philadelphia, where he earned a Master of Divinity and Master of Arts in Theology degrees in 1988 and 1989. He was ordained a priest for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and the Cathedral Basilica of Saints Peter and Paul on May 20th, 1989. In 1998, he was named chaplain to His Holiness Pope John Paul II with the title of Monsignor. In 2009, he was named a prelate of honor by Pope Benedict XVI. From 2002 to 2009, he served as pastor of St. William Parish, Philadelphia, and from 2009 to 2012 as pastor of St. Agnes Parish, Westchester, Pennsylvania. Pope Benedict XVI appointed Monsignor Nelson Perez Auxiliary Bishop of the Diocese of Rockville Center in New York on June 8, 2012. He served as the Episcopal Vicar for Hispanic ministry, overseeing 54 parishes with pastoral ministry to Hispanics, as well as formation programs and ecclesial movement. On July 11, 2017, Bishop Perez was appointed by Pope Francis as the 11th Bishop of the Diocese of Cleveland. He was installed at the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist on September 5, 2017. On January 23, 2020, Pope Francis appointed him the 14th Bishop and 10th Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. A kind, joyous, and hard-working person, Archbishop Perez enriches those ministries and people entrusted to his care. We welcome, of course, His Excellency Archbishop Perez.
Es mi gran honor presentarles a nuestro conferenciante principal, Arzobispo de Filadelfia, Arzobispo Nelson Pérez. Arzobispo Pérez obtuvo el bachillerato en psicología en Montclair State University, New Jersey, en 1983. Realizó sus estudios eclesiásticos en el Seminario San Carlos Borromeo de Overbrook, Pensilvania, donde obtuvo el máster en teología entre los años 1985 y 1989. Fue ordenado sacerdote el 20 de mayo de 1989. En 1998 fue nombrado capellán de Su Santidad Papa San Juan Pablo II en capacidad de monseñor. En el 2009 fue nombrado prelado de honor de Su Santidad por Papa Benedicto XVI. Entre los años 2002 y 2009 fue párroco de la parroquia de St. William en Filadelfia y posteriormente del 2009 al 2012 de la parroquia de St. Agnes en Westchester. Papa Benedicto XVI nombró al Monseñor Nelson Pérez como obispo auxiliar de Rockville Center, Nueva York, el 8 de junio del 2012. Sirvió como vicario episcopal del Eastern Vicariate para el apostolado hispano, supervisando 54 parroquias con ministerios pastorales para hispanos, como también programas de formación pastoral y movimiento eclesial. El 11 de julio del 2017 fue nombrado por Papa Francisco como el 11º obispo de Cleveland, Ohio. Fue instalado en la Catedral de San Juan Evangelista el 5 de septiembre del 2017. El 23 de enero del 2020, Papa Francisco lo nombra como el 14º obispo y 10º arzobispo de la Arquidiócesis de Filadelfia. Amable, alegre, trabajador, el arzobispo Pérez enriquece todo ministerio y personas bajo su cuidado. Démosle una gran bienvenida a Su Excelencia Arzobispo Perez.
I've moved 6 times in the last 10 years. Every time I turn around and the phone rings, I get moved. So I'm not answering the phone anymore. So it's great to be here in St. Augustine to reflect on the Eucharist. But I'm going to ask you to reflect first on your own for a few minutes. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you to think about it in your own heart and mind. And then I'm going to ask you to share it. So it's a simple question. I'm going to ask you to bring to your heart and mind a moment in which you felt a particular powerful experience of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. What did it look like? Where were you? And what did you feel? Think for a few minutes or a few seconds. Bring it to your heart and mind. And I'm going to ask that you just turn to the person next to you and share that experience with them. You could do it now. You could talk in church. It's okay. You could talk to the person to your left or to the person to your right or in front or in back. So let's speak a little bit about the Eucharist, but I'm going to speak to you about the Eucharist through the eyes of St. John Paul II. But first and foremost, through the heart of St. Matthew. These are the last words of Jesus on the planet. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always until the end of the age. Matthew 28, 19 to 20. The mystery of the Eucharist is actually the fulfillment of that promise, that I am with you always until the end of the age. Back in 2003, St. John Paul II wrote a beautiful document called The Church of the Eucharist, Ecclesia de Eucharistia. And I'm going to share with you some of his thoughts that came to his mind and heart when he reflected upon the Eucharist. He says that the church draws her life from the Eucharist, that the Eucharist lies at the very center of the life of the church. And it really is so true. More than anything that the church does, that any typical parish does, that this parish of St. Joseph, right? This is St. Joseph? More than anything else, what it does is it gathers around that altar. I'm assuming, I think a place this big, this is a pretty big church, a beautiful church. I'm assuming that this place is filled with all sorts of activities and programs and this and that, and all sorts of little kingdoms, you know, sometimes competing with each other, and human drama, and this one and that one, you know the deal, right? But at the end, nothing compares to what happens around that altar. It is the one place, the one thing, the one activity that draws the most people. It is what happens multiple times, probably in the day, definitely multiple times on the weekends. At my parish of St. Agnes, we had 7 masses for Sunday, just Sunday, and 3 every day. 6:30, 12, and 5:15 every day, and 7 masses on Sunday. It was beyond any other activity that parish community did. It was the most numerous and the most often, the celebration of the Eucharist, because the church draws her life from the presence of Christ in the Eucharist. John Paul II says that it is the heart of the mystery of the church, the heart of that mystery. He says that ever since Pentecost, 50 days after the resurrection of Christ, he says ever since Pentecost, the church, the people of the new covenant, began her pilgrim journey towards her heavenly homeland. As we said at Mass, we're all on the way to eternity, whether we like it or not, right? We are, that's where we're going, right? For me, it might happen by the end of this day. I don't know. No guarantees, right? It might happen by the end of this day, or it might happen, I'm 61, it might happen when I'm 110. Hope not. But I'm on the way to eternity. And he says that the divine sacrament, the Eucharist, has continued to mark the passing of her days, filling them with confident hope that what is constant is actually that Eucharist that hasn't changed. Everything else around it has changed. The way the churches look have changed. Churches have come and gone. How many have been to the Holy Land? If you go to the Holy Land, sometimes you go to these churches that are built on top of a church, on top of a church, and on top of a church, right? It's pretty amazing, right? So probably in about 2,000 years, this beautiful church will be 4 churches built on top of it, right? That's the way it happened over there, right? So you have like the Byzantine, the 4th century church, and they show you the archaeologists show you by the color of brick and dirt. And this was the Byzantine church, and this was the time of this one, and that was that one, and then you got this, and you realize that, man, we're really kind of like nothing, right? We think we're everything at any moment, as they did. The one from the 4th century, they probably gathered. They thought they were the cat's meow. 2,000 years later, there have 4 churches built on top of them. Right, on top of them. But what became constant through all those churches? The Eucharist. That never changed. The Eucharist is still there. It is still there in those churches. And that's why the Second Vatican Council calls the Eucharist the very source and summit of the Christian life. Powerful words, right? Source and summit. The Lord is present at the sacrament of the altar, in which the Church discovers the full manifestation of Christ's boundless love. Boundless love. He speaks about the Eucharist as spiritual food. Words, right, that describe what's in his heart. Spiritual food. Saving presence. He says the Church has received the Eucharist from Christ her Lord, not as one gift, however precious, among so many others, but as the gift, par excellence, for it is a gift of himself, of his person in his sacred humanity, as well as the gift of his saving work. And he says it doesn't remain confined to the past, since all that Christ is, all that he did, all that he suffered, we participate in that divine eternity which transcends all time precisely through the Eucharist. That connects us to another realm of existence. Powerful. Powerful. But of course, we human beings, familiarity breeds contempt, right? And we take things for granted when we have them very readily available. We kind of got a little bit of a taste of what St. Augustine actually called fasting from the Eucharist. That's a little weird, right? Fasting from the Eucharist throughout COVID. Because for like 3 or 4 months, I'm assuming here it was the same as it was in Philly. 3 weeks after I was installed the Archbishop of Philly, I had to cease the public celebration of the Eucharist. It was surreal. Like everything in my bone is about celebrating the Eucharist or inviting people to the Eucharist, and now I had to cease the public celebration of the Eucharist. And then get beat up for doing so, right? I got beat up when I ceased the public celebration of the Eucharist for the common good, and then I got beat up when I started it up again. And people started writing to me telling me that I was going to kill their grandmother because I'm going to make them go to church and she's going to get COVID and she's going to die, and that I'm negligent and I'm nasty. So I got beat up. In this job, I have to say, you get beat up if you go ha, and you get praise if you go he, all at the same time, right? But we did have a moment in which the Eucharist wasn't as readily available to most people as it was every day. Every day. Maybe a good thing, because we got to appreciate what we have. And yeah, we tried our best, and we did, the Zoom masses, and the streaming, but it's not the same, right? Nothing compares to being there. Nothing. That's like trying to have lunch on Zoom, right? It doesn't work, right? You can't even smell it. You can't even smell it. The Eucharist. But where does the Eucharist take us, though? There is one danger, right? There is a little bit of a danger when we turn the Eucharist into something that's about me and Jesus alone. That's a little danger, right? And that's why I think the Spirit of God, in its wisdom, gives us in the 4 Gospels different aspects of the Eucharist. In 3 of them, it kind of looks the same. In Mark, Matthew, and Luke, it's the institution of the Eucharist. It's the Last Supper. Take and eat, right? But then it shifts in the Gospel of John. And in the Gospel of John, the institution of the Eucharist happens a little differently. He tells us what happened after the meal, which the other ones didn't. And what happened after the meal was that, well, you remember, what did he do? He went and he knelt down and he washed the feet of his apostles. To their surprise. And actually, he got pushback. He got pushback. And Peter says, Peter's always putting his foot in his mouth. Always. He never seems to get it right. Never seems to get it right. No, you're not washing my feet, buddy. That's not happening. Until he said, Peter, you better back off. Because if you don't let me wash your feet, you will not enter the kingdom of God. Can you imagine? Now remember, this is the same guy that had been called Satan. Right? You haven't called Satan. So Peter did the math really quick. He did the math really quick and he says, oh, don't just wash my feet, then wash like my whole body. Like, let's, just do what you got to do. But and then Jesus said to the apostles, he said, do you see what I did? Did you see what I did? You go and do the same. And so adds to the Eucharist this beautiful, beautiful consequence. This beautiful consequence, which is now mission. Which is now mission. So that we can't go to the Eucharist and just believe that it's just me and him, because it's actually me and us, and me and the world. Because in partaking and entering the mystery of the Eucharist, then we have to somehow, some way, imitate the mystery we celebrate. When I was ordained a priest in 1989, that was part of the instruction of the bishop. Imitate the mystery you celebrate. And if there's one thing about celebrating the Eucharist that really kind of rubs me the wrong way, is actually the words of institution, which I have to say in first person. And I often say to the Lord, can I just say, take and eat because this is your body, it's not mine? Right? Why do you have to get me involved in this? Right? I don't want to say it's my body and it's my blood. Why do you have to complicate things? Well, in part, it's because as a priest, I kind of have to imitate the mystery I celebrate. And also give of my body and give of my blood. Not because I'm the Savior, but because I'm called to share in his priesthood. But you know what? So are you. So are you. So entering the life of the mystery of the Eucharist involves then mission. Giving of ourselves to others. Becoming ourselves the bread that's broken and the blood that's poured. If not, it's kind of like empty, superficial. It's like two people getting married here and promising that they're going to love each other for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, and then they walk out and go different ways. I said, well, what happened over here? Well, that was over there. That was over there. So the Eucharist has an evangelizing mission. Because we have to somehow, in some way, become good news and Eucharist for others. And if that doesn't happen, then there's something that went wrong, that didn't connect. It didn't connect. Pope Francis writes this beautiful, absolutely beautiful apostolic letter called The Joy of the Gospel. If you haven't read it, how many have read The Joy of the Gospel? Raise your hand. A handful. So here's my homework to you. If you do one thing within the next month, go online, you get it for free, doesn't cost you anything, right? You don't have to go anywhere, and look up The Joy of the Gospel, read it. Read it. It tells us what's in the heart of the Holy Father and of the Church for the direction of the Church for the next 50 years. So if you want to know where the Spirit is guiding the Church in the next 50 years, I'm not going to tell you. You go find out yourself. Read The Joy of the Gospel. But he does begin The Joy of the Gospel with a call for the world, for you and I to renew our encounter with Christ. Because if that doesn't happen, nothing makes sense. Our teachings don't make sense. The doctrine doesn't make sense. Our moral teachings don't make sense. If it doesn't begin with the encounter with the risen Christ. As we saw with the apostles, right? The disciples of Emmaus. They went and they immediately had an encounter. They immediately went and began to share what they had experienced. Which really, I have to say, runs a little counter to American culture. Really does. I kind of even saw it here as I asked you guys to share. You don't see what I see, but half of you sat like that. Well, I thought I asked you to share. No, half of you sat like that. What, talk to people about what's in my heart? Oh no. Because there are two things that we're in our culture not supposed to talk about. What are they? What is it? Why? It took you 3 seconds to figure it out. Religion and politics. Probably wise on the political end. But religion? To go up to a person and ask them, what's your religion, is like asking them their weight. Right? It's not just something we do. If someone came up to you and said, how much do you weigh? You would say, I beg your pardon? But it's almost the same reaction when we ask somebody, so what religion are you? It's sort of like, you're getting too close here. So we've been in our culture kind of trained to really not talk about our faith. In other parts of the world, faith is worn on the sleeve. Have you ever been to like the Middle East? Faith is all over the place. Once you step outside the boundaries of this beautiful complex, you really don't see a lot of signs of faith. Very secular. That's the American world. You go to the Middle East, and our Muslim brothers and sisters, 5 times a day there's a call to prayer. You hear it. You hear from their minaret, right? You hear it, a call to prayer. We ring our bells, and they call the police because they're too loud. But this gift that we have received of our faith, this encounter that we have with the Eucharist, has to take us to mission. But unfortunately, I think we've turned the church into a place just of arrival and not what it also is, which is a place of departure. What are the last words of the priest or the deacon at Mass? What is it? Go. Not stick around. It's actually go. But not go to breakfast. It's not that type of go. It's the same go that was said to the apostles on the Mount of Olives in the last moments of Christ on the planet. Most of his 2.5 years or 3 years, Christ has spent the time calling people to come. Come. Come and be my disciple. Not volunteers, by the way. We Christians should not use that word. Should not use that. And we use it all the time. I volunteer in church. Jesus did not call volunteers. That word doesn't exist in the New Testament. He didn't even have sign-ups. He didn't even have sign-ups. They didn't make announcements in a synagogue who wants to be a disciple or an apostle. Because he knew that if he did that, no one would come. As we do too. They get up there and they says, we need catechists, and we go like this. Imagine if I went up to you and said, what's your name? Linda, can you be a catechist for this parish? Yes or no? That's it. I have a friend of mine who's a bishop. When he was called by the apostolic nuncio and told that that the Holy Father had named him a bishop, he says to the nuncio, he says, well, listen, can I pray about this? You know what the nuncio said to him? He says, Father, the church has already prayed. It's either yes or no. Jesus went and saw Matthew sitting at the tax collector table. He didn't give him a flyer. He said, Matthew, come. And by the way, Matthew, you got to leave the table. Not a good place for you to be. You got to leave that. Come. But then at the end, he told him to go. But not go to breakfast in downtown Jerusalem. They don't have bacon, by the way. No, he told him to go and to share everything that he had communicated to them through word and action. And because they did that back then, you're actually sitting there today, and I'm standing here. If they had not done that, we wouldn't be here. And you know, they had it tough. We don't have it tough. We really don't. We leave here and try to share our faith, and someone tries to stop them, and we sue them. We take them to court for violating our civil rights. Back then, sharing the faith for the first, especially 300 years of Christianity, you know what it meant? It meant you possibly lost your life because you had to choose. You had to choose. You either denied or proclaimed. One or the other. One or the other. But Pope Francis, you know, is calling you and I to back to mission, back to the roots of Christianity, which wasn't only about come, it was about go. It was about go. He speaks about us becoming good news ourselves, right? Now we know that people around us in our family and among our friends and co-workers, they either fall into the good news category or the bad or no news category, right? We know it. So a question that could be an interesting question for you and I to ask ourselves, or maybe ask the people closest to us, am I good news? Like, what do people say when you walk into a room? What do they feel and think that they don't tell anybody when you walk into a room? Because we know in our own lives and among our own families and circles of human beings, there are people in our world, right, that when they walk into our room, many people in that room go, oh brother, look who just arrived, right? And those types of, and I could probably go each person right now and ask you to give me 3 names. And you would be able to give me 3 names that when they show up on the scene, inside of yourself, you say, ugh. You laugh because you know. You might be one of them. And you don't even know it. And then there are other people that walk into a room, and man, they light up the room right away, right? Maybe you're one of them. And so, coming to that altar is that we have to become what we celebrate, imitate what we celebrate, become what we receive. We become good news for the world and for the people around us. Because we understand that coming around that altar means that we go. And so while Francis invites the world to renew their encounter with Christ, he then speaks about the Church of the Eucharist, as a community of missionary disciples. That's what's in his heart and mind. Now, those are words that we're used to using, disciple and missionary, but he's made them one. He's put them together. He's made them 2 sides of the same coin. Up to Francis, well, there was discipleship. The bishops themselves wrote a document, can go and make disciples. Kind of implied mission. But when I was a kid, a missionary was somebody that went to Africa. That was a missionary. I wasn't a missionary. I was a volunteer, if anything, but not a missionary. And here's the difference between a disciple and a volunteer. So you volunteer to teach the faith of the little ones as a catechist, and you see yourself as a volunteer. And it's Saturday morning, and an hour before classes begin, someone knocks at your door. And it's family that you haven't seen in 35 years. And they showed up unexpectedly. The volunteer picks up the phone and calls the parish and says, something came up, I can't come. Doesn't matter if there are 35 little ones waiting for you. Something came up. I can't come. The disciple says, make yourself at home. I'll see you in 2 hours. That's the difference between a disciple and a volunteer. The missionary understands that following of Christ is only half the call. The other call is to go. And so Francis describes what the fruit of actually encountering Christ in the Eucharist is in the Christian heart, and that's mission. He says to be a disciple is to be a missionary, and to be a missionary is to be a disciple. And then he describes what it looks like. It's a heart that takes initiative, that takes the first step, that doesn't wait to respond to the needs of the human heart that he or she encounters. Takes the first step, doesn't wait. As Jesus took the first step. Little different sometimes with the apostles, right? The apostles kind of wanted to shut down those that were trying to get in the way. Remember Jesus walking with the apostles, and there's Bartimaeus sitting over there, and he starts screaming at Jesus, Son of God. What did the apostles do? They went over to the guy and say, shh, shut up. And what does Jesus? Bring him here. Bring him here. Takes initiative. The missionary disciple, he says, becomes incarnated in the world around it. This is what he says. Such a community that gets involved, that takes the first step, has an endless desire to show mercy, the fruit of its own experience, of the power of the Father's infinite mercy. The Lord gets involved. He involves his own as he kneels to wash the feet. He tells his disciples, you will be blessed if you do this. This evangelizing community gets involved in word and deed in people's lives. It bridges distances, he says. It is willing to abase itself if necessary, and it embraces human life, touching the suffering flesh of Christ in others. The fruit of the Eucharist is to bring us closer to others. Not just to bring us closer to him, but to bring us closer to others. He says that this missionary disciple who's nourished and sustained by the Eucharist also accompanies, right? Accompanies. Is supportive. He says a community that's evangelizing is supportive, standing by people at every step of the way, no matter how difficult or lengthy this might prove to be. It is familiar with patient expectation, apostolic endurance, constantly consists mostly of patience and disregard for the constraints of time, and allows God's grace to work. And sometimes we don't see God's grace working. And to accompany, and for us Americans, it's really tough because we're task-oriented. We want to see the end results. What is the outcome? We're now in the middle of, or finishing up, the Synod of Synods, right, that we've been doing in the world, driving everybody crazy, especially Americans, because this Synod on Synods that the Holy Father called us to, the process is as important as the outcome. Does that make sense? The process of coming together to share our faith is as important as the outcome. Actually, the report that I have to submit is only 10 pages long. And that is and every diocese in the country has to submit to the Conference of Bishops a 10-page report. You know how long the report that the Holy See has asked from each country has to be? How long do you think? 1,000 pages, you think? 10 pages. 10 pages. After all this thing, all they want is 10 pages. This is really. We Americans want to send 200,000, right? I got a report from young adults that just one segment of my diocese, and it was 25 pages long. But the process to get there was as important as the outcome. To accompany, right? Let me tell you a story about accompaniment and how things work in ways that we even don't know. We just don't know. That's the way of the kingdom. Jesus said the kingdom of God is like the farmer who goes out and he sows the seed. Just throws it around. And while he sleeps, that seed matures and grows and bears fruit. And then he says, and the farmer knows not how. Because once the seed is sown, it has a life of its own. About 25 years ago, a young woman, 19 years old, was brought to me. She needed direction and counseling. Oh, she really did. 19 years old, she was a single mother, cross-addicted through alcohol and drugs. to support her child. She worked at a gentleman's club, worked in that world. We might look at that and say, oh my God. But if you heard her story, you'd say, you know, I understand how that happened. I could understand. She came to see me over a period of months, 3 or 4 months, every week, week after week. One of the brightest young women I ever met. Articulate. She didn't have a high school degree. She dropped out. Had to. She had to support a child. Had to support her. She certainly was not one of privilege. But man, she was bright, insightful, intelligent, articulate. And getting to know her over weeks and weeks and weeks, I could see her inside, not just what was outside. And we began to talk, and I would begin to say to her, you know, you're worth a lot more. You're actually better than this. You got to discover that. Eventually, I got her prepped up to go into counseling, and she was able to trust enough to do that because she had been hurt a lot. And then I was transferred from that assignment, went to another assignment, was made a bishop, went to New York for 5 years. Now I arrive in Cleveland. I'm in Cleveland about a year later. An email comes in to the general mailbox of the diocese. It wasn't even addressed to me. But it said, I understand that Father Nelson is now in Cleveland, and I want to make contact with him because I just want to let him know where I ended up. And it gets put on my desk. And it said, Father Nelson, I don't know if you remember me, but I met you over 20 years ago, and we saw each other frequently for a while, and then you went your way and I went mine. But I just want to let you know where I am and what happened to me. And she told me a little bit. At the end was her name. I recognized immediately who she was, and it was her name, PhD. Okay? Desires. Francis says that the disciple, the missionary disciple, is really concerned about bearing fruit. He says that it cares for the grain. He or she cares for the grain and does not grow impatient at the weeds. I love that phrase. The sower, when he sees weeds sprouting among the grain, does not grumble or overreact. He or she finds a way to let the word take flesh in a particular situation, bear fruit of new life, however imperfect or incomplete these may appear. And finally, is joyful. The missionary disciple who encounters Christ in the Eucharist is joyful, is hopeful. And again, a joyful heart is very attractive to people. A bitter, angry, and negative heart, we just kind of like move away. Move away. And all of that is actually the fruit of our encounter with Christ. We just have to guard to know that encountering Christ in the Eucharist is going to then demand of us that we become what we eat, that we imitate the mystery we celebrate, that as Christ is broken for you and for me, somehow in some way, I have to strive to do the same. God bless you. Have a great rest of the day.
Well, thank you, Archbishop Perez, for an incredible keynote address. And I can understand the beginning of that when he said, I can't win for losing sometimes at your job. I will say that from a weather standpoint today, right? The weather bears witness. And it's now our turn to kind of go, but in this case, a little bit different. It's going to be lunch at this point. Pope Francis grants a plenary indulgence to all the Catholic faithful not impeded by penalty or censure who participate in today's Mass at the Eucharistic Congress. Please see your program for conditions and more details. Confessions continue and are available in the main confessionals in the rooms on either side here of the Marian Chapel behind me. And we will now take our lunch break. The tracks will begin at 1 o'clock sharp, you guys, so about an hour and 10 minutes. The English track will be located here in the main church. Just a reminder, the Spanish track will be in the Cody Center, the teen track will be in the gymnasium, and the children's track will be at in the cafeteria. These locations are across the street. Be careful, you guys. A shuttle will take families to the children's track, and that shuttle will be outside by the St. Joseph statue. If you are leaving the property to get lunch, please be careful and alert as you drive. There are a lot of people here today, and we will see you again in just a little bit over 1 hour. We will stay on time.
Gracias, Arzobispo Pérez, por su excelente conferencia. 2 puntos. Papa Francisco otorga una indulgencia plenaria a todos los católicos fieles, sin impedimento o censura, que participen de la misa de hoy del Congreso Eucarístico. Favor de revisar el programa para los requisitos y detalles del mismo. Las confesiones se llevarán a cabo en los confesionarios y en los salones a cada lado de la capilla mariana, aquí a mi espalda. En estos momentos pausaremos para almorzar. Las sesiones comenzarán a la 1. La sesión en inglés será aquí mismo en la iglesia. Como recordatorio, la sesión en español es en el Centro Cody. La sesión de los adolescentes en el gimnasio y la de los niños en la cafetería. Las mismas están al cruzar la calle. Un autobús transportará a las familias a la sesión de los niños. Ese transporte les estará esperando afuera al lado de la estatua de San José. Si desaloja este local para el almuerzo, favor de tener precaución para salvaguardar las vidas de las personas que están visitando hoy. Nos vemos a la 1. Gracias.